بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين.
We have sent you as an evidence of our grace toward all the worlds.
مدد يا نبي الله جان جاندر حضرتي أحمد محمد مصطفى.
He has been sent to teach humankind how to love their Lord, each other, and every creature based on their connection to the Creator. Universal mercy, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. You have made man and woman equal, upheld the rights of orphans, depicted the human heart as God's dwelling, regarded animals and plants as your followers, and decreed, he is not a perfect Muslim who eats his fill and lets his neighbor go hungry. As the messenger of a faith that makes slaves and kings pray together, you are Muhammad the trustworthy, who have made Bilal the forlorn into Bilal the beloved, turning feeble-voiced Bilal into the muezzin of the entire Muslim world.
Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina wa Nabina Muhammad.
Bilal, Mecca's dark-skinned child with a bright heart. He was born in Mecca, but this did not make him a Meccan. For his father Rabah and his mother Hamama were slaves, both from Abyssinia, today's Ethiopia. He was an alien because of his color, his homeland, and his mother tongue. Moreover, Meccans regarded children of slaves as slaves. Bilal had been born a slave, black, alien, dispossessed, and poor. And at that time, these qualities prevented one from being regarded as a human being. Black men were seen as second class, as with the poor and foreigners. Nobody had any value for the sake of their humanity. Their value came from their kin and clans, genealogy, or wealth. Bilal the Ethiopian had none of those. The Meccans were pleased when one of their slaves bore a child, as this meant a new slave for free. Thus, upon birth, Bilal became the property of the Banu Jama tribe, like his parents. His master, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, had given him special training and put him in charge of managing some of his businesses when he was in his 30s. He would lead the trading caravans going to Damascus. Bilal was an able and virtuous slave and had a beautiful voice. Sometimes the caravan would come to a stop in the desert, and nothing could persuade the camels to go ahead except the melancholic and touching melodies that Bilal sang. In one of his journeys to Damascus, Bilal met a nobleman named Abu Bakr, who was leading his own trading caravan. Bilal was impressed by Abu Bakr, who did not treat Bilal as a second-class person. Thus, they established a friendship, which continued after their return to Mecca. His submission to Islam. Soon, the names of Abu Bakr and his companion Muhammad, peace be upon him, came to be frequently mentioned in the family meetings of the Banu Jama tribe, but mostly in tones of hatred, animosity, indignation, and derision. These sentences would start with "they," saying that Abu Bakr and Muhammad, peace be upon him, were critical of worshipping gods their fathers worshipped, that Muhammad, peace be upon him, had started a new religion, and that Abu Bakr was one of his first followers. Mecca should be cautious about this new religion. But these conversations also mentioned how truthful, faithful, trustworthy, and righteous Muhammad, peace be upon him, was, and this was what really bothered Banu Jama. With a man of such high moral character talking about a new religion, it would be very hard to keep Meccans from following him. In fact, Bilal was very much impressed by the new religion adopted by Abu Bakr, who treated him as an equal. When Abu Bakr knocked on his door one midnight, Bilal was under this influence and hope. Abu Bakr called on Bilal to accept the religion introduced by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Islam, in which, as in the religions of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, all human beings are equal before God, their supremacy measured not by their language, race, or color, but by fear of and loyalty to God. Bilal had already seen the ugly face of disbelief. He had watched some Meccans build idols from halva, worship them, seek assistance from them, and then eat them when they got hungry, and ridicule them at heart. He had observed some Meccans who were ashamed of their daughters, killed them by burying them alive, and cried for them inwardly. He did not need to see another wrong deed in order to have faith in the new religion. He needed no more than the invitation to this new religion, which, as Abu Bakr said, sees slaves and masters as brothers, women and men as two halves of an apple, and foreigners and locals as equals, and which preaches worshipping an omnipotent, compassionate, and just God, rather than false gods who do not benefit mankind. That night, Bilal converted to Islam, saying, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." In the morning, he went directly to his mother, telling her how beautiful Islam was and what its good tidings were. Thus, he started to convey the light he found that night to other people at dawn. If Bilal the Ethiopian had failed to say yes to Abu Bakr's invitation, nobody would remember his name today. But now he is the best known and most beloved black figure of the last 15 centuries. Today, hundreds of millions of people know him and feel respect at the mention of his name, and Muslims give his name to their sons. Before the dawn of Islam, he was a mere slave who would herd his master's camels in return for a handful of dates. But his faith and determination made him a king. All around the world, kings spoke of him as an exemplary man, and muezzins, those who recite the adhan, the call to prayer, tried to emulate his voice.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allah.
On the pilgrimage to Medina, every Muslim feels as if they have heard his voice in the adhans recited 5 times in a day. Indeed, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said of him, "What a fine character Bilal has. He is the leader and master of all muezzins."
Allahümme salli ala seyyidina Muhammedin nebiyyil ümmi
After his conversion to Islam, Bilal's life gained a beauty and enthusiasm he had not known before. Working as a slave throughout the day, he would listen to the words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sitting alongside slave owners. For a time, the message of Islam spread in secret. When the believers reached a certain number, 7 of them professed their faith openly. Bilal was among them. He not only declared that he was a Muslim, but also destroyed the idols in the shrine of Banu Jamma. This went beyond a simple profession of faith to open revolt against the established order. This revolt was waged not by rich and free men such as Abu Bakr, but by a dark-skinned slave from Ethiopia, Bilal.
يا حضرتي بلال.
Torture. For Meccan idolaters, the conversion of prominent figures such as Abu Bakr to Islam was bad enough, but they were powerless against them. Bilal, on the other hand, was a slave. In their belief, he did not own his body and soul. How could a slave, who was not allowed even to express an opinion without the permission of his master, attempt to convert to another religion? This meant a complete upheaval throughout Mecca and against Arabia's economic and social system. While fighting against the religion introduced by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Umayyah ibn Khalaf had lost his own slave to the call of this religion. Mecca was making fun of him. They would see him as a master who could not handle his slaves. Umayyah decided to settle this matter once and for all and teach Bilal such a lesson that no other slave or free man would dare attempt what he did. In Mecca, masters always resorted to the same methods for resolving issues with their slaves: corporal punishment and torture. Umayyah was more resourceful in this respect. They took Bilal to the desert. They stripped him and tied him to a tree, leaving him exposed to the fatal heat of the desert. Then they untied him and forced him to lay down on rocks which were so hot that they cooked meat on them, until he fainted. The hatred in their hearts still unsated, they went on to throw him down onto the scorching desert sand, and then place huge rocks upon him. They demanded only one thing of Bilal: "Tell us that you renounce your religion and glorify the gods that our ancestors have worshipped. Glorify them and be saved." But Bilal had already known the truth. The faith in one God as the creator of all. The more they tortured him, the stronger his faith grew. They beat him, spat on his face, and left him in hunger and thirst to the point of death. But he kept on saying nothing but, "There is one God." The day ended, but the torture did not. Umayyah became tired, and another Meccan master took his place. "Bilal," they said, "we have grown weary of torturing you. Declare your faith in our idols, Lat and Uzza, and deliver us from this torture." But it was as if Bilal were elsewhere, practically in another world, and continued to say only, "There is only one God. There is only one God." Rescue. "O Umayyah, sell this slave to me." This offer, which would save Bilal, was also a message of deliverance to Umayyah and his torturer friends. Still, they held out at first. The offer was coming from the Prophet Muhammad's friend, Abu Bakr, who was offering to pay Umayyah more than the expected price for a slave. Eventually, Umayyah and his friends decided to sell Bilal. This move, though intended to rescue Bilal, would also save them from being defeated by Bilal's faith. For Umayyah, it was a bargain, as he was willing to sell Bilal for less than the price offered by Abu Bakr. But Abu Bakr was willing to pay 100 times more, because he believed that the value of a man could not be measured in money. As soon as he became a free man, Bilal went directly to the Prophet and dedicated his life to his service. From that moment on, he served as the Prophet's treasurer until the end of his life. Once there was a minor dispute between Bilal and Abu Dharr, one of the Prophet's companions, who scorned him, saying, "You son of a black woman." When the Prophet was informed of this dispute, he felt extremely sorry, and summoning Abu Dharr, said to him, "You have belittled Bilal because of his color, haven't you? Is your mind still in the age of ignorance?" Abu Dharr was deeply sorry for the words he'd said in a moment of anger, and did not know how to express his regret. He wept for many hours and placed his face on the ground and said, "I will not raise my face from the ground until Bilal grinds his foot on my face." When Bilal heard Abu Dharr's words, he showed his greatness once more. He helped Abu Dharr up and said to him, "Oh, my most precious brother, I have already forgiven you. May God's mercy also be upon you." This face deserves to be kissed, not to be tread upon, and hugged him. Abu Dharr would frequently relate this incident in order to show what a brilliant heart this dark-faced Bilal had. With these superior qualities, Bilal became one of the most distinguished figures in Medina. Muslims spoke of him with praise and appreciation, and when Bilal heard them, he would weep in humility and say, "I am just an Ethiopian. Until just yesterday, I was a slave." When Muslims decided to call the faithful to prayer, God's messenger chose him as the muezzin. Whenever it was time for prayer, God's messenger would turn to Bilal and say to him, "O Bilal, comfort us with your adhan."
Allahu Ekber,
And Bilal would recite the call to prayer, in which God is glorified and the fundamentals of belief are upheld.
Eşhedü en la ilahe illallah.
His voice was now a river of mercy, providing comfort not only to God's messenger, but also to all Medina. In the past, his voice was heard only by God when he was suffering the atrocities of Umayyah ibn Khalaf. But now, Bilal had become the caller, whose invitation was accepted by the faithful 5 times a day as they convened in the Prophet's mosque. Has any other person's voice been awaited in such anticipation and received such respect throughout history? The adhan in the Meccan period. Eight years after he emigrated to Medina, Bilal returned to the city where he was born, raised, humiliated, and tortured. And his return was in the company of the Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, conquering army of 10,000. Mecca's doors were wide open to the Muslims who had been forced to leave their homes behind. The conquest of Mecca served as further evidence that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had been sent as God's mercy to the entire universe. No mention was made of the tyranny they had previously suffered at the hands of the Meccans. The Prophet's message, read at the doors of Mecca, resonated in every house of the city. O Quraysh, God has taken you from the haughtiness of the age of ignorance and its veneration of ancestors. Man springs from Adam, and Adam sprang from dust. This message meant the end of the old system in which people would take empty pride in their genealogy and wealth and humiliate slaves and aliens. The final blow to this system was delivered by Bilal, who climbed to the rooftop of the Kaaba and called the faithful to prayer. His life in Damascus and the last adhan. Following the conquest of Mecca, the Prophet did not live long. In his farewell sermon, which he delivered 1 year later during his farewell pilgrimage, he once again stressed that no man can claim supremacy based on skin color, and that superiority can only be attained through fear of and loyalty to God. On that day, the Prophet's companions were aware that their beloved Prophet would soon leave them. Bilal was among those who were crying. When the Prophet passed away 1 year later, Bilal knew that nothing would fill the gap which the Prophet had left. He requested permission from the first Caliph, Abu Bakr, to leave Medina and settle in Damascus. Here he continued to tell people of the virtues of Islam, kindling hope in the hearts of those suffering in despair. Following the conquest of Jerusalem during the Caliphate of Umar, Bilal visited Jerusalem, which would become a prominent center of Islam. For years, he had been unable to call the faithful to prayer. For when he would come to the sentence, "I testify that Muhammad is the apostle of God," he could not say the Prophet's name. Memories of him would come rushing in, and he'd begin to cry, unable to control his voice for his grief. In Jerusalem, upon the request of the Caliph Omar, he called the faithful to prayer once again, becoming the first man to declare in this city, visited by the Prophet in the night of Isra and Miraj, the Prophet's ascension, that he was God's messenger. After his return to Damascus, he dreamt one night that the Prophet was calling him, "O Bilal, why don't you visit me?" As soon as the day broke, Bilal set off to Medina. As he came closer to Rawda, where the Prophet was buried and where he had once called the faithful to prayer, he remembered his past life with the Prophet, and he wept. He finally threw himself on the tomb of the Prophet, saying, "I've come, O Messenger of God! I've come, O Messenger of God! I've come, O Messenger of God! How could I forget you? How could I leave you? I've come, O Messenger of God!" He was so immersed in this crying and supplication that he did not notice two shadows behind him. It was the Prophet's grandsons, Hassan and Hussein. They were very happy to see Bilal again. So was Bilal, as he could discern the Prophet's fragrance in them. They asked the Prophet's muezzin to comfort them once again with his voice. Bilal knew that he could not decline this request, however difficult it would be for him.
Allahu Akbar, Allah.
He stood at his usual place where he had called the believers to prayer 5 times a day for many years. He recited the most beautiful adhan of all times. This last adhan of Bilal's so touched the very hearts of the Medinan people who knew God's messenger and who prayed with him, that they came to the Prophet's mosque crying. They thought for a while that they would see the Prophet once again when they reached the mosque. This was the last call to prayer by Bilal the Ethiopian.
أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمد